We'll build this together, any type of weather. Unity is key. Keeping first G-O-D. We will conquer the world. Baby, just you and me. I can vision us now. One big happy family.
Hi, guys. I'm Latoya Walker,
I'm Lonnie Walker.
and welcome to Way of the Walkers. So, today we have a very special guest. This is a bonus episode. We had 2 episodes before that we spoke about trauma. The title of our 2 episodes were Her Trauma and His Trauma. And we walked you guys through, the childhood trauma that we experienced, how it affected us personally, and then how it impacted our relationship. And so today we wanted to have a special guest on. This is Dr. Birdie Leatherman. Leatherman.
Leatherman.
She is the past director of the HPD Psychological Service Division. As a licensed clinical psychologist, she has 34 years of counseling experience. Wow.
I started when I was 10.
When you were, yeah. Okay, got it. 20 years in law enforcement and 2 years of college level teaching experience as an adjunct professor at Houston Baptist University and the University of St. Thomas. Wow.
Yes, ma'am.
Her clinical experience includes working with individuals, couples, adolescents, children's, families, and organizations. Dr. B earned her PhD from Louisiana State University. And we wanted to bring her on because she is a doctor and an expert in this area of trauma. We are not experts. We wanted to tell you our stories, but then we wanted you to have a guided episode where she can really give our audience some tools and some real understanding what trauma is. So we wanted to welcome you. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you very much for having me.
Yes, babe. Say hello to Dr. B.
Hello, LSU Tigers. How are you?
Tigers. Good.
Yeah, she
Yes.
is an avid lover of LSU Tigers, right?
Yes.
We won't get into that right now.
Okay.
That's another episode.
Yeah. So basically, on our former episodes about trauma, we outlined the things that we went through as children and some things that we went through as adults and how it really impacted our relationship. We thought it was a poignant topic because in media, on TV, wherever, you hear a lot about trauma, you hear a lot about childhood trauma and triggers, and I think those are buzzwords, but I'm not sure if people really talk about how it impacts a marriage. So we wanted you to come on to tell us basically what is trauma, first of all, and then we'll have more questions about that. But we really want you to outline what trauma is and how it impacts people individually.
Sure.
Okay.
Okay. So I'll just start with the definition of trauma is it's simply something that happens that's so far out of the ordinary that we could not have anticipated or expected that it would happen. And so when we think about trauma, it runs the gambit. It could be physical, it could be psychological, it could be emotional. It's not one size doesn't fit all. That's my favorite statement. You're going to hear me say that several times today. One size does not fit all, and everyone's an individual.
Right.
So everyone is not equally or similarly traumatized by various events that happen to them. So you can't just say X is traumatic because it's not traumatic for everyone. There are some things, of course, that would fit into that category, but there are many, many more that don't qualify as traumatic for a specific individual because of how they're wired, who they are, what they've already been through. For example, coming out of law enforcement, if there's suddenly a shooting in this building, I'm traumatized because I'm scared to death. Police officers engage. They jump into action. They are not traumatized by what would traumatize me. So one size doesn't fit all, but it's out of the ordinary. Our brain is not expecting that, and suddenly something happens, or even chronically, cumulatively, something happens, and our brain has to decide, how am I going to How am I going to handle this? How am I going to protect the brain? Because that's what the brain does. The brain protects itself and the body, and it wants to figure out, how do I protect myself from that event? But extraordinary is the term, and it's abusive, it's painful, it's dangerous, it's life threatening, et cetera, et cetera.
It's shocking, it's
It,
jarring, it's
yes,
something that,
yes,
like you said, it's unexpected. So it
yes,
jars you, you're like,
yes,
wait a minute.
yes,
And then you were saying something about the brain that was interesting.
yes.
So the brain puts up boundaries after a traumatic experience. Is that what you're saying? It's kind of like a red flag. When we go through something, the brain automatically makes you feel a certain way to try to prevent that from happening again.
No,
Okay.
prevent you from getting affected by it again.
Okay.
See, so it's a radar. That's how I describe it. It's a radar that is scanning the horizon to see what's going on,
Mm-hmm.
what's coming at me, so I can be ready for it. And I like to keep things real simple. And trauma for me with the brain is, you turn your brain upside down and shake it.
Okay.
And the brain's not supposed to be turned upside down and shaken. So it doesn't want that to ever happen again. So it looks for ways to scan the horizon before the trauma occurs. That's when it recognizes triggers, because it doesn't want to be turned upside down and shaken. Now, the recovery piece of that is, it has to normalize and adjust to what happened to it. And so it's going to try to figure out ways to normalize it, make sense out of it, and defend against it going forward. And that's why we can get triggered by
Mm,
events and circumstances and sounds and smells, and
yes.
all of the senses can detect something that reminds us of that traumatic event. And the brain wants to be ready for it, so it can protect itself and you from being impacted by that. And can I digress for just a moment?
Yes.
Impacted and impaired are not the same terms.
Okay.
And that's one of the misnomers in the psychology, mental health community, is that people believe that if I'm impacted, then I'm going to be impaired permanently. And that's not true. Again, one size doesn't fit all. An impairment becomes mental illness, but an impact may or may
Mm,
not be develop into anything long term or chronic. So I want to make that distinction sort of from the get go, that I may be impacted, but that doesn't necessarily mean I'm going to be impaired.
impaired.
And I love to say to people, don't compare your reaction, don't compare your situation, don't compare your stuff to nobody else, because you are you.
And you're going to be affected differently, like you said.
Exactly. One
Right.
size
Doesn't
does not
fit
fit
all.
all. Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, in saying all of those things about being impaired and impacted, I wanted to ask something that really pertained to us. Both of us were abandoned as children,
Mhm.
and that definitely impacted us. And I don't know the difference, if it's if what makes an impact into impairment,
Mhm.
but I know that I have struggled my entire life with dealing with the spirit of the orphan spirit, and being abandoned, and how we relate to each other in our relationship. And I know he as well.
So for the abandonment piece for me, so my father was never in my life, and it's almost as if that was expected. I think I underestimated the trauma attached to that, but the women that were in my life, the way that they used men, they used them for what they were good for, what they needed in that moment, and then they disposed of them. So my mentality was, daddy not gonna be there. So I don't even know what I'm missing in that aspect. But when it came to women, which brought to our marriage, was I met this wonderful woman, but you know she's not gonna stay.
Mhm.
You know what women do. Yeah, she's different, she's sweet, she loves you, she's acting like, but that's what you saw the other women do. And
Hmm.
then what happened to the guy after that? Now, I'm not saying that these guys were angels, which
Sure,
they were
sure,
not.
sure,
Oh my
sure,
gosh, that's a
sure.
whole nother episode. But the mentality, that the seed that was in me was, women are going to use you until they get everything that they need from you. And then once you can't keep them content,
Mhm.
then they're going to dispose of you, and it's going to be the next gentleman in the assembly line. So how that shows up, she's showing me love. I don't want to receive it because I don't want to fall in love with her because now I'm attached. Now I can be hurt. So I'm having walls. So what was happening in our marriage was, well, it's dating too. So you have walls up. Well, I love her. I loved her from day 3.
Sure.
So that wall come down. Well,
Right.
now I gotta get another wall up because remember,
Right.
it's just a matter of time. And so that's how that showed up for me, not even being able to receive love from her. And she was pouring it all over me, but I just basically put a bubble around it. Don't touch me. A couple of little bit
Right,
got
right,
on
right,
me.
right,
And
right.
then
Oops.
again, I was putting up another one.
Yes. See that you don't know how profound what you just said really is, because one of the foundations of being a human being is attachment. Okay, now I'm gonna be the professional that I am,
Come with it.
but
We ready.
I'm getting full. Attachment is the Holy Trinity.
Mm.
Now I didn't necessarily want to go here,
Listen, we
but
are believers, so go where you want to go.
attachment is the Holy Trinity.
Yes.
God didn't need nobody else, but God attached to the Holy Trinity from the get-go. So we are attachment beings. And foundationally, if we don't learn that as a source of support and comfort and strength, we're all over the place.
Yes.
And we can look at children in the nurseries when they're born, the newborns,
Yes.
and the newborns in an orphanage. If the newborns in the nursery,
Let's pause for a second. I
Sure.
don't know what happened to this.
Her camera cut off.
Oh, it is. Let's see.
1 second.
Don't forget the clock.
Yes.
You're about to make me cry. So
but
cut
see,
it
that's
out.
but that's
No,
why I was saying I didn't
Oh,
want to
we
go
want it.
listen,
there.
We want
But
it.
see,
We want it.
I mean, that's what
you
I'm a straight shooter.
you're free.
Yes.
You're free.
Okay.
Because
Let
we're
the
free
Holy
on
Spirit
here.
move you. And that's what we do.
Yeah.
We're
We
like,
free.
no, they know we're believers.
Yeah.
We not fronting.
Sorry about this.
That's okay.
I live in the real world.
This is for production.
I
And you
don't
can't
know about-
control cameras.
I don't know about them, but
No,
I
it
live
was
in the
this
real
getting
world.
too good.
See, it's the enemy. It's the enemy.
Liar, liar, pants on fire.
What? Listen, you can come sit on my lap. Oh,
Just a little pillow
continue.
right here.
There we go.
We back.
Okay, so you can start back to, I love what you said about abandonment and attachment.
Right.
And then you can go from there. Okay. I was across my legs.
Tell us when we're ready.
3, 2, and 1.
So you said a mouthful when you said attachment and abandonment, because that is probably the most fundamental lesson that human beings have to learn in order to navigate life successfully. That is why God took such care to not only show us the Holy Trinity and how they interacted with each other, but he took great care to make sure that mothers attached to their children from the time they're born until the time they're there.
Yes.
And it's if you really understand motherhood and the dynamics, our children can smell our breast milk.
Right.
Our breasts respond when it's time to feed them.
Yes.
Because God wanted parents not leaving dads out, but the physical connection between mothers and their children is not coincidental.
Right.
And when that's lacking or disrupted abruptly, then we've got to either adjust or we've got to deal with the consequences that follow. So the way you described how you resisted attaching and you resisted her obvious love for you doesn't surprise me, because that original foundation of attachment is so very critical. And when we hear people talk about what happened in my childhood, they're not exaggerating, because what happens in our childhood does make a great impact. Now, as adults, we have to take responsibility to overcome and correct what happened in our childhood. But that childhood foundation, particularly when it comes to attachment, is critically important for us not to minimize and to supplement if and when it was broken or if and when it never existed. And
Mm,
it really doesn't matter if it's just the parents, but there's got to be a person in a child's life that they can attach to when they need comfort, when they need protection, when they need reassurance consistently. And when that is lacking, the child learns to just give up
yeah.
and go back to the nursery. In the nursery, there are babies who know they're not going to be picked up because there's no one there to comfort them, so they stop crying.
Wow.
They just don't cry anymore. They're hungry, they're wet, they don't cry because they have learned that no one comes to meet my needs
Mm.
even when I cry. And now just translate that into a toddler and a preschooler and a teenager. They've just stopped crying,
Ugh.
but now they are acting out that abandonment.
In usually destructive ways, self-medication, going out and committing self-harm, living reckless lives with
And flip it over.
individuals. Yeah,
I'm looking for love in all the wrong places.
exactly.
It's all
Exactly.
connected. And
Ah,
again, individual differences. We don't do it the same way. But that attachment, abandonment foundation is so critical. And sometimes it's intentional. Sometimes it's not. It's just what happened in life. It's an accident.
yeah, yeah.
But a child doesn't
Know the
have
difference.
and they can't process that.
That's right.
And if there are not adults there to help them navigate that gap and that void effectively, and unfortunately, in the world we live in, so many babies do not have solid home foundations to form those solid attachments.
Yeah.
So I told I told the story that I was basically a walking offense, and what I meant by
Mm,
that is I was I was not gonna let no one take advantage of me.
Mhm,
I was not gonna let anybody mishandle me.
mhm,
And if you attempted to or tried, and when I say that, if I interpret it as that,
mhm.
sometimes they weren't,
Right,
but if I interpret it as that,
right,
I was gonna check you
right.
immediately.
First.
Now I'm gonna check you where that you like, I don't even want to deal with this dude
Mhm.
on no level of any kind of misunderstanding. And that's what I built up. So by the time I ran into this wonderful woman,
Mhm.
that's what was in me.
Yeah,
And so we had to navigate that.
oh,
yeah,
yes.
yeah.
And so for me, I was raised with, I guess, like the ability to do well.
Mhm.
So my parents, I had a stepdad and my mom. They would have me do things that were more adult, for like a kid. I
Mhm.
was 8 and I was taking care of my infant brother.
Mhm.
And if anything needed to be done, oh, Latoya can do it.
Mhm.
And we know if she does it, it's going to be done well.
Right.
So I had these other siblings that really weren't doing what I had to do. And being abandoned by my father and my mother for a time, I processed that as if I perform well, then I'm loved. So I'm trying to perform well for him to
Mhm.
receive love.
Yes.
And he's throwing up walls
Mhm.
because he has his abandonment issues as well. Like
Right.
you said, on one size doesn't fit all. It's not going to
No.
look the same.
Mhm.
The same. And it was just like this all the time.
Right.
So it was really difficult to navigate that.
Right.
Really difficult.
Sure, and it would have to be
Yes.
because you don't recognize it. See, let's go back to trauma for a minute.
Yes.
Some trauma is consciously recognized. We understand it, we know it happened, we can go back to that date and then move forward.
Hmm.
But some trauma is not consciously processed because either we're too young or because we weren't in a position to be able to grasp how that negatively impacted us. And so when you think about looking at trauma from a conscious and an unconscious way, I don't have to know why I'm doing what I'm doing. I just know that the walls go up.
That's right.
I got to protect myself,
Right.
or I've got to perform well. And
Right.
you don't necessarily connect the dots. Now, I'll give a personal example of myself. My father was an alcoholic.
Mm.
And so I grew up with the notion that if I was absolutely perfect
Mhm.
and good and I
Mhm.
shined, we wouldn't pay that much attention to the fact that, oh yeah, by the way, daddy is an alcoholic.
Mm.
And so that was the role that I took on, was I was the shining star in my family. And
Mhm.
unfortunately, I had another shining star too, but that was the unconscious decision that I made that I didn't recognize. I just thought I just like to do well and
Right,
stay out of
right.
trouble, etc. But unconsciously, there was a little girl inside of me that wanted no focus on that negative reality. Let's just focus on this part of it, and then we'll all be happy.
Wow.
And
That is
and
that is
yeah.
that is some of our story as well. On my notes, that was one of the questions that I have
Mhm.
is how does it impact a child when their caregiver is an addict?
Mhm.
Because my stepfather was an alcoholic and he also had other things that he did.
Mhm.
And then he was raised until he was 10 by an alcoholic
Alcoholic,
grandmother.
drug addicted grandmother,
Right. And
and the trauma. So it's interesting because I was listening to when you were talking. So you are traumatized and you don't know. So it was so much going on from 0 to 10 that we knew that she drank and was on drugs, but I didn't recognize that the hurt that I felt from my mom not being there or my biological father being there
Mhm.
because I was in the midst of that. And I know for me, I can speak for my wife. I don't drink or do drugs because of what I saw.
Mhm.
Um, my grandmother would come home, I'm probably like 3, and the dishes wouldn't be clean. And so she would call everybody down. Everybody get whooped,
Mhm.
a 3-year-old,
Mhm.
because the house not clean.
Mhm.
That doesn't make sense.
Right.
But that's what it was.
Yes.
And so I think about when you said that, it's like some traumas, I didn't realize the abandonment of not my mom not being there until I was with her here.
Mhm.
Then that shows up. And
Yes.
then how that looked, which
Yes.
it looked a certain way.
Yes.
And then she married a man. And so he was the father figure. And then it was like, oh, so one of these really exists. But then that turned into another thing also.
Yeah.
yeah.
And it's really too complicated just to analyze it individually. It's so that's what you just said. It has so many levels and layers to it. It's not funny.
Right.
And when you understand that, because part of it is oh, this is what it's supposed to look like, but then the other part of it, and who are you and how dare you? At the same time,
Right.
excuse me,
Right.
you just gonna roll up in here and now you think da 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 da, or your mother's gonna roll up here after the fact and now
Mhm.
she wants to
Mhm.
hold up. And to work through all of that is complicated. And I would never say everybody needs a therapist. No, I wouldn't say that.
Mm.
But I would say that everyone has to do their own work as an adult.
Yes.
If they can do it as a child, great, or an adolescent, great. But as an adult, you're responsible for doing the work you need to do so that you are able to navigate life effectively and not pass on
That's
what you
right.
went through
That's
and
right.
what impacted you, because our children don't deserve that.
Mm.
But unfortunately, too often we do. So that, again, when you look at what you just said, no, we can't we can't possibly know and understand it all, but it still affects us.
Yes.
And someone else, and you can recognize later on, why am I doing this? Or someone else can bring it to your attention. Why are you doing that? Like, I'm just trying to love you and you're rejecting my love. Help me understand.
The good thing about our marriage, one of the good things about our marriage is
We got more than one.
That's
uh,
obvious.
I was able to understand myself enough to know how certain things impacted me as a child. And he was able to share his traumas, which helped me understand how it impacted him.
Mhm.
And so when those things were happening between us, I could step back and not take it so personal
Mhm.
and say, okay, this is because of this. And
Mhm.
he's reacting like that because of
Mhm.
that. It's
Right.
not really me. It was hard.
Right.
It was hard.
Right.
But that is what helped sustain us
Yes.
because if I took offense all the time to the way he reacted, we wouldn't be together. We
Absolutely.
would not. I don't know if I could have tolerated. If I could have not tolerate, like I'm not gonna take this anymore.
Sure,
But it was
sure.
so painful.
Right.
It was so painful.
Right.
So I was able to. We were able to navigate that.
Mhm.
I didn't realize until we were in the marriage how much not having a father, which is a guide, an example, and not having the proper guidance, or I guess the best way to say a mother figure,
Mm.
because there's certain things that I just didn't pick up. So that means you have someone picking up what they want to pick up. And if you're immature, you're not going to pick up the right things. So I'm coming to her, and then when we finally did go to counseling, they were like, "Hey, how's the relationship with you and your mom?" It goes,
Yeah.
I'm like, it's not well. And then they
Yeah.
said, well, that is what's the problem. Until you clean that up,
Right.
there's going to be a problem there. So we had to clean that up.
Mm-hmm.
And then a little bit later, it was like, how you dealing with not having a father? And then I had to walk through that.
Right.
And then it's now you're like, I've completed everything. So
Right.
now I'm understanding like certain things that happen. It's like that wasn't that bad, but why are you making it such a big deal? It's because, like you said, the triggers.
Right.
And
Right.
it was things that weren't slights that I was seeing as slights,
Right.
or it was something that I was like, if that's a slight, I need to check that.
Right.
When sometimes it wasn't.
See, this is just so much to unpack.
Yes.
It's so much to
Yes.
unpack because let me back up and talk about my father and make a comment about what you said. My father's my ace spoon.
Mm.
He happened to be an alcoholic,
Mm.
but he was my ace spoon. And so there's two sides to every coin. So as the father whose father was not present and the biological father did it the way he did it, you are now challenged to be a role model. And so our parents are our role models. And part of me being that shining star
Mm-hmm.
was because my mother was basically depressed all of my childhood. She was present, but she was really depressed because of her own childhood. So it's a two-edged sword. You've got to be healthy for yourself, but you've also got to be healthy for your children.
Yes.
And so often, if I have a frustration in my therapy, clinical practice, it's that parents who choose not to allow their children to get the therapy that they really need consistently or long enough. And I understand money's a factor, but I also understand the kids and the teenagers can't be committed for themselves. They've got to
Right.
have the adults
Right.
make that commitment. So I want you to hear me say that not only were you reacting to your own development and your own healing, but you're healing as a role model for your children who are, I love to tell parents, they're taking notes.
Yes.
They're watching you and taking
Absolutely.
notes. And they don't even
Absolutely.
realize they're taking notes, but they're taking notes. And I, like you, I mean, I can drink a wine cooler, a 12-ounce wine cooler in 2 nights because I ain't going to be.
Okay.
I'm not going to
Okay.
be. So, got it?
Yes.
All right.
So another thing that we both dealt with in our childhood was sexual abuse, and that was very impactful as well. And I'm going back to impacted and impaired. I'm not sure what it did to us, but that was a hard journey. That was something that honestly we're still navigating, because I think that leaves a scar that is tender underneath sometimes for a lot of people.
Yes.
So what would you advice would you give to couples who are dealing with that same issue?
I love it. Two things. Perspective matters.
That's good.
How you look at whatever you look at will determine what you see. So you have to ask yourself, how do I look at that?
Absolutely. How do you tell the story about it? That's
Right.
what we talk about.
Yes,
How are you
yes,
telling that story?
Yes, perfectly.
Yes.
How do you tell that story about it? And part of it, I love what you said earlier. You have to recognize that as a child, it wasn't your fault.
Yes.
Period.
Period.
Period. It wasn't your fault. But then if you are a believer and you have faith, you want to understand, God, help me, help me, help me.
Absolutely.
Well, help me. And you don't want to be deceived that God wasn't paying attention or that he
Mm.
was punishing you or that he didn't care. You have to begin to try to understand, if you believe God cannot lie, which I believe, how's he going to use this?
Right.
And back then, he knew this.
Okay. Don't get me to cry, Dr. Mia.
He knew back then
Ugh.
that this would manifest and that our paths would cross and we would be here because there are so many young girls and young boys, teenage girls and teenage boys, even if they don't call it abuse, they're being manipulated, they're being oppressed, they're being taken advantage of from a sexual perspective. And they've got to get the word. We've got to teach them so that they can be empowered to make some different decisions. And God knew you all could handle what you had to
Ugh.
handle. And that doesn't mean he went, yippee, that's no. But he has to know who he can use the way he would use them. My parents were cuckoo crazy as a couple. Cuckoo crazy. I am one of the best marriage counselors on the planet.
Mm.
I'm divorced, so
Mm.
don't misinterpret what I just said. But I have learned and I can teach because of what I went through. And we
Right.
all have our stories that we can either sit on them, we can act out. And I was going to say that a minute ago. We have a choice when we come up in a certain environment. We're going to do what they did,
Mm-hmm.
or we're going to do the opposite of what they did
Right.
because we are committed to not letting that pattern continue.
Absolutely.
And as an adult, we get to choose. As a child, we just act. But
Mm.
as an adult, you're held accountable for making choices. And people go both ways. So you know what I do for a living. So I hear all the horrible stories. And I like to tell people, there's nothing you could tell me I haven't heard. Oops. I heard one yesterday
Wow.
about the
Wow.
child who grew up in an addicted home, and the parent allowed the child to start using drugs at the age of 8.
Wow.
And the child used hard drugs to the degree, we hear about how drugs impact your heart.
Mm-hmm.
His heart is burned out, and he's a teenager. And he
Wow.
wears a pack, a substitute heart,
Mm.
every day of his life. Now, that 8-year-old didn't choose to use drugs. That 8-year-old didn't choose to get high. That 8-year-old didn't. But in that environment, that's how severe it was. And I shook my head because I thought I'd heard it all.
Wow.
And since the age of 8, that child had been using hard drugs, not because the child chose that, but because at the end of whatever that atmosphere was, that was what they did, and he was a part of it.
Wow.
Yes.
There's so much. Oh, go ahead, baby.
So for me, and I'm going to step into this a little bit because I know men typically, they don't want to talk about being molested and they don't want to talk about the impact. So one of the major ways that it impacted me, being molested by a man, was I didn't trust men. Period. Now you would think it would be more, I don't trust a man around my woman, but no, I didn't trust men at all. Uh, the man that molested me was a stepfather, so he was supposed to be a father figure. So not only did it impact me not being able to trust men, so it could be as simple as a friend, a guy that I would really call friend. He came by me one day and he poked my sides. I went off on him. Said, man, don't ever touch me like that. Because in my mind, I was being triggered through my molestation. So to me, that's not a touch that I approved of.
Mm.
He didn't mean no harm. He was playing, but he doesn't know that I was molested by another man.
Right.
And then I had another situation where we were standing on the elevator. It was a group of guys. We all knew each other. And I think the guy was playing. He playfully put his hands on my shoulders and just like a little massage.
Sure.
And I said, man, we're going to have to talk about you touching me.
Mm-hmm.
And everybody in there bust out laughing.
Mhm.
And I was like, no, it's not funny. It's
Mhm.
inappropriate for him to touch me without my consent.
Mhm.
In both of those situations, it was innocent touch. They
Right.
weren't trying to molest me,
Right.
but in my mind. And then that comes in just
Right.
having relationships with men. And then with my wife,
Mhm.
it taints sex.
Mhm.
It taints how you think about it. It
Right.
taints how you may be motivated by
Right.
that.
Right.
Because it's almost like it's been perverted.
Right.
In navigating through that, and some of that leads to bad behavior.
Mhm.
But I'm talking about just me and my wife. We having
Right.
conversations, and she kind of like, "Hey
Right.
man, why you like?" We talking real talk.
Right. Right.
This me and you, boo.
Mhm.
And I'm kind of like, yeah, I don't want to go into that.
Mhm.
Right.
And
Yeah.
it's because it's kind of
Sure.
like I don't want to. It's almost like I'm ashamed to express like I really like, or I really want, because I'm like I don't want to say this, and then she think I'm like that
Sure.
person that's a
Sure.
pervert
Oh
that
gosh.
did something inappropriate.
Sure.
I didn't have this plan to say today,
Mm,
but this just
mm,
came. It was
that's
like I
good.
needed to speak for men because men
Sure.
that are molested
Right.
typically they think that it really didn't affect them like a woman being molested,
Right.
Mm,
but it's an effect
Sure.
because it's in the mind.
Sure. And that goes back to what I said about the brain has to process the trauma.
mm,
That trauma has to be processed. And that reaction to the tickling is standard. That's normal. When I teach about trauma, I say the woman was raped in the parking lot. She's now at home. The man went to jail. She's at home with her husband. He sneaks in the house and tickles her. She tries to knock his head off until she processes it. Oh, I'm in the house. Oh, yeah, the door was locked. Oh, that's just John. He's being silly.
Mm-hmm.
But then she has to remind John, but that's not funny to me.
mm.
Correct.
That's not affectionate to me. And they have to recognize those boundaries. And you have to define your own boundaries. But it's so funny the way you describe that, because it's a function of who the men are, the when you've been sexually molested, of who the same sex or the opposite sex is, but it's also a function of how you see yourself.
Absolutely.
So they go hand in hand, and you can't separate one without the other. One more point. I have a handout about scars and wounds, and one of the sections talks about the triggers and how it's you're kind of old enough to remember LPs, long playing
Mm-hmm.
records. She's looking at me like not necessarily.
Records.
Yeah,
Records.
yeah, records.
Come on, baby. Don't we that young?
No, I got
It's
it.
just usually we
Right.
don't say LPs.
Right, exactly.
Right.
So anyway, it's on the record. In the old days, the needle sometimes got stuck,
Right.
and it was a
Right.
scratch.
Mhm, mhm.
And then you have to pick it up and move it past the scratch.
Mm-hmm.
Wounds and scars are scratches on our lives. And what's ironically surprising is that the reaction that we get often when it is triggered is more intense with a smaller stimulus. So
Go deeper. What does that
I
mean?
overreact. For example, the tickle is not throw down, pull your pants down,
Mm-hmm.
da 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 da.
Mm.
Right.
It's just a tickle,
Right.
but your reaction
It's as if.
is intense.
It's as if they did
Bam.
do that.
And
Correct.
that's part of the brain's protection, is for
Wow.
you to be able to have that radar scan the scenario and say, look out, look out. But
Mm.
it's often more intense than the original abuse assault was.
Wow.
Your reaction is more
Right,
intense.
right.
I was in my feelings both times.
Exactly.
And then another time a guy touched he was like, I like bald heads, and he
Uh-huh.
touched my head.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'm
Yeah.
sensitive to men touching me.
Yes.
Yeah.
For
And
sure.
at the end of the day, you have to recognize how that impacts you as a dad with your own children. And I don't remember if you all have boys or girls or what.
We got two
But
girls and a boy.
2 girls and a boy, and you want to be able to recognize what the messages are you send unconsciously because of your sensitivity, because of your own history.
That's right.
So,
That's right.
and I'm glad you brought that up, because there are, men are wired differently.
Mm-hmm.
And if you think about just going to therapy, women overwhelmingly seek treatment, even just a regular physician. Women overwhelmingly go to the doctor more than men do, but it doesn't mean they're sicker or
Mm,
less wounded or more wounded. It's just the
right.
dynamic of our culture and how men are socialized to hold it in and be tough
Mm-hmm.
and don't whine and be a big boy. And the bottom line is, but I'm hurting and I need to cry.
Absolutely.
And if I can't have that opportunity to heal by the truth, then I'm walking around wounded and scarred. And I got to hold it in because that's what the culture says,
Yes, absolutely.
unfortunately.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah.
It's true. Something that you said about the LP, the records, and when there's a scratch,
Yes.
you can reset it.
Yes.
But we need to go through the scratch, right? When
Yes.
we're going through the traumas that we've experienced, is you got to sit in it sometimes. What I wanted to ask you about are victim cycles. Like when you are a victim, you keep going through cycles.
Mhm.
It's like the LP keeps going around and around.
Right.
You get to that
Right.
scratch, you skip over,
Right.
you don't walk there, you keep
Right.
repeating the same cycle, right?
Absolutely. Yes.
How do people break it? How do they, when you get triggered and you go right back and then you get triggered and you do it and you don't work through that pain?
Mm.
What advice would you give people when they're experiencing those cycles?
Let me say two things.
Yes, ma'am.
The first thing is that perspective.
Mm-hmm.
You got to know how you look at what happens in your life. And you can look at poor me, my life sucks, or you could look at it, hello, when you going to do something about this.
Okay.
This you were here a month ago, 6 weeks ago.
Yeah.
So we have to know how I'd like to say God gives us opportunities to address what we need to address, and life will teach us lessons. And I'm a quote girl. I talk all the time. So I have a quote that says, until you learn the lesson, the pain lingers.
Oh, that's
Until you
good.
learn the lesson, the
That's
pain
good.
is not going to go away. So from a perspective vantage point, I think people miss the cues and the signals that says enough is enough.
Which could be the trigger.
Exactly.
Exactly. Right.
So that's part of it.
Mhm.
But then the other part of it is that sometimes it's outward pressure that other people can apply. Because I may not see it, but somebody needs to say, have you noticed? Do you realize? And it's like you said with your husband, I'm just trying to love you, man. What are you doing?
What are you doing?
What are you
Let
doing?
me love
I'm
you.
just, yes, let me love you.
I'm hiding.
Yeah. And see, you understand it, but you are the trigger. You're the catalyst that helps him recognize,
Ugh.
why am I rejecting this beautiful, gorgeous, God-sent woman? Because I'm cray-cray.
Right. And we
Because I'm
just kept
wounded.
triggering each other back and forth and
Yes.
back.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
crazy.
And
Yes.
if you go back to God's design, marriage was intended to make each other better.
That's right.
And you're supposed to be his mirror, and he's supposed to
That's
be your
right. That's
mirror,
right.
so you
That's
can
right.
see each other from a place of love and grace. Because that's what God does in our lives. He allows us to go through the process of becoming who he originally designed us to be,
Yes.
so he can use us fully. The
Right.
process ain't always fun,
It ain't.
but it doesn't mean it's not the process that we need. The three of us in here are very different. I don't know how God talks to you. Sometimes God calls me little girl. Sometimes God says to me, go sit down. And I know exactly what's up because I'm messing up some kind of way. He's got to check me. And I don't like being checked, but I like the results that follow being checked. But if you don't look at it from that perspective, you think God is mean and he
Right.
doesn't like you, he's unkind, rather than as a parent, you got to check your kids
That's right.
sometimes because they get cray cray, and we can't allow that to happen. And God, the ultimate parent, can't allow that to happen.
That's
to
right.
us.
Because it's out of love. He
It's
disciplines out of love.
completely out of love.
Absolutely.
But you got to have that perspective. And if you go back to what happened, the wounds that you have, I have a wound right here where I fell in my parking garage, and it got pussy and nasty, and it was infected. And my younger brother's an MD, and I said to him, I sent him a picture. Hey, what I need to do with this?
It's looking a little crazy.
Yeah, it's looking a little crazy, and it's not healing. And he said, go get a toothbrush, scrape off the pus, and put the medicine on after it starts bleeding. And I said, you cray cray. But I knew he was right
Right.
because I had to go beneath the wound
Mm-hmm.
to put the medicine on,
That's
and
good,
that was gonna
doctor.
hurt.
Mm-hmm.
And it did exactly what he said. When I went far enough down, just little trickles of blood, it's like, okay, now you can put the medicine on. And psychological wounds are no different. And the pain is real, but it will heal. My knee is
Mm,
fine. But when that first happened, why are you so close to my knee? Back off. Like you
right.
said earlier,
Mm.
you're not necessarily trying to hurt my knee, but I'm not sure.
Right.
So
Right.
I'm going to react like I'm warning you, don't get close to my knee. And when we recognize that, then we are able to, get the courage and the strength and the support we need to do the work that hurts
Mm,
so that the bleeding can occur, and then we can put the medicine on.
that's good. That's good.
So I'm gonna give you an example. Our example.
Okay?
So she was trying to love me.
Mm-hmm.
I wasn't willing to trust it on the
Mm-hmm.
surface.
Mm-hmm.
But because of my abandonment, I was afraid she was gonna leave me.
Sure.
So she's trying to love me.
Uh-huh.
I'm trying not to fall in love because I'm afraid she gonna leave me, but I want her to stay.
Mm-hmm.
Those are tug of wars. So I want her to stay,
Sure.
but I'm rejecting her,
Yeah.
which is gonna make her leave, but
Yeah.
I want her to stay.
Right.
The undercurrent of that.
Right.
And it's a constant battle.
Right.
So what is, since we were talking about records, what is the nickel you're putting on top of the needle?
You do remember.
So that we can quit, because at some point we're
Right.
skipping.
Right.
We're hitting the
Right.
same thing.
Yes.
Mhm.
Yes.
And then
yes.
that's when you put the nickel so it can
Yes.
go on and roll
Yes.
over.
Yes.
And so that was early in our marriage.
Mhm.
She's like, why he don't want to see my love?
Yeah.
And I'm kind of like, well, you gonna leave me.
Right.
And then, but I want you to stay.
Yeah.
So I'm also sending her mixed signals.
Yeah.
You're not
So
gonna like this.
really, well, I'm gonna love it because I'm through that now, but
Yeah.
I want to know what
Right.
you gonna say to that.
Yeah. You're some people won't like this.
Right.
Oh, okay.
At some point in time, because he's a man, he's an
Mm.
adult. He's not a child. This is not the same rule for a child exactly. You're not gonna fight him to love him. You're not. That's the first thing. You're not going to fight him to love him. He has to choose to receive your love. But then the next question, the next nickel is, how can I be loving in a way that makes you feel you can trust my love? Because
Mm.
only he can tell you what that answer is.
Right. Right.
And I don't know what that might look like, but only you can answer that, because that goes back to that child inside of you who knows what you needed from your father, because he did abandon you. And you need to know, what does that little boy need as reassurance
Oh, that's good.
that she won't leave you? But it starts with, I can't fight you to love you.
That's
Mhm.
right.
See, and
That's right.
but he's an adult. You kind of can say that to a teenager, but anything a little bit younger than that, you're on shaky ground because they can't process it
Mm.
well enough. I
Right.
love what you said earlier about the age of 10. That's when we start to kind of really begin to process right and wrong, good
Mm.
and bad, who's at fault, who's to blame, conscious kinds of thinking processes. But before that, kids just don't have the capacity. So for him, you want to make it clear, I'm not going to fight you to love you, and you're going to have to decide if you're going to receive my love. For you, you've got to begin to look at, what do I need from her to reassure me adequately that she's not planning to leave. Everything is fair in therapy.
Mm.
One of the things that I watch my daughter teach my 3-year-old grandson is, mommy's mad.
That's
Mommy
right.
didn't like that,
Mhm.
but mommy still
I
loves
still
you.
love you.
I still love you. I'm not going to leave you. And sometimes that is the simplistic response that we have to give. And that may be what you need to hear from her. And you have to be able to look at that as an adult and figure out, what do I need from her as reassurance? Because you're going to get mad. You're going to
Mhm.
have arguments,
Mhm.
disagreements. You're going to want some space. But that doesn't mean the love is gone.
Right.
That doesn't mean the love is diminished. It just means, right, what we're doing right now ain't working.
Right.
And we need to step back.
But that is what you learned. that previously that's how you were, but now
Hmm.
we understand each other. We don't
Mhm.
trigger each other like we used to.
Right. Well, like I said, we went
We're
to counseling, went
yeah.
through the mother thing, went through
Yeah.
the father stuff.
Mhm.
So now, but I was just thinking as she was speaking, just that
Mhm.
was a cycle.
Yes,
Yeah.
it was. It
Yeah.
absolutely was a
Yeah.
cycle.
And the rules are different for children and adults.
Yes.
Because, as adults, we are responsible. As children, they need the adults to help them navigate this complex
Because
stuff
it's so
called life.
heavy.
Yes.
It's so heavy.
Yes.
I like to use an analogy. Sometimes with our kids, they want to know things.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll say, well, do you remember when you were 6, when we went on vacation
Mm-hmm.
and you had luggage? Dad pulled the luggage out for you and
Mhm.
rolled it up to the house
Mhm.
because you couldn't carry it.
Mm-hmm.
I said, this right here,
Mm-hmm.
you can't carry it right
Mhm.
now. So let us help you with that.
Right.
But once you get to a certain age, and oh, there goes my earring, and a certain understanding,
Yeah.
then you are able to carry more, right?
Definitely.
Yeah. So
So,
something
so,
that,
so
oh, go
let me
ahead.
let me say one thing
Yes,
about that,
ma'am.
because I firmly, firmly believe this. You can explain almost anything to a child truthfully on their level.
Absolutely.
All you have to do, and I'll say this again: everything's fair in love and war. I had a client whose um, first child was born from a relationship. They weren't married, and the child was maybe 9 or 10, and then they had a younger sibling following a marriage. So we got one child not when the parent was married, and another child that comes in a marriage. So the younger sibling says, well, how's that my mommy, but that's not your mommy?
Mm.
And they wanted to understand what happened here. So we're not going to talk about illegitimacy and unwed marriage, because
Mm-hmm.
it's a little child.
Mm-hmm.
But the answer was pretty simple. Before mommy and daddy got married, daddy had a girlfriend. And daddy and his girlfriend had a baby, and the baby is boom, boom, boom. Oh, they can comprehend that.
Mm-hmm.
And that has nothing to do with premarital sex and
Right.
all this stuff, but it's just daddy had a girlfriend and they had a baby.
Yeah.
And that's why I'm not that child's mom, but I'm your mom, and daddy's both of them.
Right.
But the challenge for parents is to figure out, how do I break it down truthfully? See, I never want parents to lie. I like your answer because I don't want you to lie and make up something.
Mm-hmm.
But I also want to challenge parents, find the language. Like, you know what I do for a living? Dad committed suicide, 2 little boys.
Mm.
And I said to the mom, they have to know, because you cannot take the risk that they'll be somewhere and someone stupid who's drunk will say, yeah, Billy Bob shot himself and blah, 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 and the little boys didn't know.
Right.
So I said, Mom, you have to tell them. And Mom
That's
said,
good.
I can't. So Mom said, you got to.
Mm.
So I got 2 little boys at HPD. This man was a police officer at my office at HPD trying to talk about suicide. And I just talked about how sad some people are. They're hurting so much. They're so sad. And every day they wake up sad, sad, sad. And sometimes people don't want to live anymore. And sometimes when people don't want to live anymore, they do things to hurt themselves so they can stop living.
Yeah.
The youngest of the 2 pressed his head into his mother's chest like you never would imagine. He did not want to comprehend that. He did not want to let that in. But I was able to bring it down and then circle back and talk about God, because God loves daddy. And I don't play this who goes to heaven. I don't play that game because I ain't God. I'm not going to try to determine that,
Right.
because that is too complicated for my pay grade.
Mhm.
But I brought that down to a level that those little boys could understand it without prejudice, but truthfully. We didn't just make up something that happened. And so I challenge my parents to break it down to the level of the child you're talking to. And if the child levels are different, you can't have the conversation at the same time.
That's right.
You
Right.
have
That's
to
right.
divide them and talk at the level that they can process.
That's good.
So that's a
So,
challenge.
yes, it is.
But it maintains the parent's credibility with the child. I want my child to know that I will always tell you the truth, even if it's something that embarrasses me or challenges my reputations. I would rather have integrity and truthfulness with my child, with grace, than than compromise my integrity and or the truth.
That's good.
And all parents aren't comfortable with that, but I'd rather you, like you said, say you can't carry that suitcase yet. When you can carry that suitcase, we'll talk about it another
Absolutely.
time.
Yeah, because that's definitely something that we experience with their diagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
We have to be
Mm-hmm.
very aware of what they
Mm-hmm.
can understand and
Yes.
comprehend.
Yes.
Even when we break it down,
Yes.
sometimes they're like, okay, we'll wait on
Yes.
that.
Yes.
But something that we've gone through, we've went through counseling before, and something else that we've done that we spoke about on our trauma episodes is that we went through inner healing. And I wanted you to give our audience some therapies that they can, research and try to understand where they can go to get help.
Sure, sure. And I love that you introduced that because that's always people want to compare what I did to what somebody else
Right.
did.
But
And
it
I don't
doesn't, one
it
size
does
doesn't fit
one
all.
one size doesn't fit all, exactly. And so I love that you're bringing that up because that's critical because some people can um go to traditional therapy
Hmm.
and sit down and have a conversation and work through, talk about, and come to resolution. Some people need groups
Yeah.
of other people who've been where they have been so that they can relate without necessarily having to expose their own pain as fully as they might not be ready to. So individual traditional psychotherapy, group therapy is both of those are options.
Hmm.
I like the inner healing.
Hmm.
That's good, and they're that's again not just one formula for how people offer that and how people walk through that.
Right.
There's also EMDR is a psychological technique. It's desensitization, no, eye movement desensitization reprocessing, and it's a process where you are actually the therapist is talking you through some situations, and you are using your eye movements to have to kind of trip the brain, trigger the brain. Neurofeedback is another sort of a brain process where you are, at the end of the day, ultimately, what you're trying to do is to regulate the emotional arousal. Ultimately, that's what you're trying to
Mm,
do because when you regulate the emotional arousal, then I can
Mm,
face it, then I
mm.
can deal with
that's
it.
good.
Because even if it's like, he's massaging your shoulder, and I can see guys just,
Yeah.
hey, bro, yeah,
Right.
we got
Yeah,
this or whatever.
exactly.
But
Mhm.
if you are sensitive to that, you don't see, hey, bro, you see, are you
Creepy
setting
man.
me up?
That's
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
set me up. And so that's another process. Some people do good work journaling.
That's good.
They
Yeah.
journaling and
Yeah.
meditation, they kind of go
Yeah.
hand in hand. And I'm a journaler, and I all my journals are to God, and I'm just talking to God. Whatever I lay it on the table, me and God are talking. But I
Hmm.
can, when I'm talking and writing, I can hear God
Mm,
because it's quiet and it's still, and God can slip a little something, something in there. So that's another process that works for some people. But the list is long, and the idea is simply to figure out what fits you best.
right.
It's not what fits other people, what fits you best, because
Right.
everybody's not ready and able to talk about it yet. They
Mhm.
may not be able to talk about it publicly until they diffuse the emotional arousal
Right.
just with the thought of what happened. And unfortunately, what too many people try to do is avoid it.
Absolutely.
They
And
just run and avoid it.
that's all right. That's why I
Yes.
wanted you to give all the options,
Yes,
people out
yes,
there.
yes.
There are options.
There are multiple options, and at the end of the day, if one option doesn't seem to be working,
Flip it
let it
up.
go and
Exactly.
move on to
Or
something else.
intermingle options,
Yes.
right?
Oh, yes.
Right?
Yes.
Do
Absolutely.
what floats your boat.
Absolutely. Because in the process, you can tolerate, respond to different techniques at different levels of your healing.
That's right.
And again, that's just like I don't go from a cast just to my normal activities. I go from a cast to a soft boot. I go
Mm-hmm.
from a soft boot to some physical therapy. And then I can go to a lesser normal activity.
Low
But
activity,
yeah,
right.
it's a low activity, but it's a process.
It's a process.
Yes.
And that's what life is.
Oh, I'm
It's a
glad you said that.
process.
Well, and I'm gonna
Healing is a
right.
process.
And I'll tell you what a very wise person said to me. I won't call God's name, but it was a wise person. Said life is a 4-letter word,
Mm,
just like the other 4-letter words.
mm,
4-letter
mm-hmm,
words, hell, damn, shit. Okay.
mm-hmm.
And I went, whoa, but that's so true.
It's so true.
And he didn't promise us a rose garden, but he said, I'll never leave you or forsake you.
That's right.
And I believe that, and I hold on to that as I navigate life.
Life. Well, we have had such a good time speaking with you, but we want you to tell our audience where they can find you, because I
Okay.
know after this episode,
Uh-huh.
they're going to be hitting you
Yes,
up because
yes.
you're a wealth of knowledge.
Yes, yes. I am I'm on Instagram, I'm on Facebook. I'm Dr. V, Dr. Verdi Leatherman. I have a website, Surrender or Explodes.
Mm.
Surrender or Explode is my latest book.
Yes,
And
yes.
it's about playing the game of life God's way. It's kind of written for teens and young adults, but it's also written for the adults who love them because they were once teens and young adults.
Yeah.
And they have to teach from the perspective of how they navigated life. So my website is surrenderorexplode.com.
Mm-hmm.
Instagram, Dr. Verdi Leatherman, Facebook, Dr. Verdi Leatherman, and you can find me there and just learn all that you ever thought you wanted to know about who I am and what I'm doing. And I think the last thing I want you to hear me say is I love what God has called me to do. I absolutely love it. It's not always easy. I cannot tell you the phone calls I get of what people said. A man called me just this week about his daughter who was experiencing some severe emotional problems. She's Down syndrome since her mother died about a month ago. And the little girl has just kind of regressed in some significant ways. And he didn't tell me how old the daughter was. On the phone, we left the message. And when I first called him, I said, "Sir, first of all, how old is your daughter?" He said 56.
Wow.
So a 56-year-old woman has lost her mother within the last month, and she has regressed in some really basic kind of ways. Whoa. He didn't say a teenager. He didn't say an 8-year-old. He said a 56-year-old woman.
Wow.
So he and I are going to sort of take a look at what's going on and what are his expectations and the circumstances surrounding the death. But that's complicated stuff.
It's life.
It's life stuff.
The four
Exactly.
letter
Yes.
word.
Thank you.
Yes.
And at the end of the day, because life is life, we always need some support. And I'll go back to what I said at the beginning. The Trinity is no accident. And when we understand that God is what's that word? He likes people and connections. I can't think of that agrarian word, but he's that.
Mm-hmm.
And if we understand that, how dare we think we can navigate life alone?
On our own.
How dare we? And then particularly, how dare we think our children should be able to do that? And the responsibility that parents have. I'm just going to breathe now.
Well, we hope that you come back and join us.
I would be delighted.
This was wonderful.
I would be delighted.
This is one of our bonus episodes of Way of the Walker. And if you find what we do here worthwhile, we hope that you would share it with someone whom you find worthwhile. Make sure you subscribe to our channel, like this video, and we'll see you guys next time.
We'll build this together. Any type of weather. Unity is key. Keeping first G-O-D. We will conquer the world. Baby, just you and me. I can vision us now. One big happy family.